Yeah, yeah. Than the negative protein. And it's a very long, and we'll take our time with it because I think it's one of the best encounters with Heidegger. And also something very, very important for us today, given the, how we have to think beyond the Anthropocene. Stiegler is really trying to avoid doing philosophical anthropology, centering, becoming anthropocentric anymore. So he's come up with this new thing that we have to work through the entropic, through a new kind of energy. And we'll talk about that because again, for me, the course, possibility is higher than actuality. As you know, in many of these classes, and I think everybody that's here does not have any belief system in the Democratic Party of the United States, nor the Social Democrats globally, or the European, wannabe left, etc. We really need to think through alternatives that are completely outside the box at this point. Everything has failed. We're really just dealing with a major, archaeological failure, in my opinion, at this point. Everything that is attempted just goes down, in so many ways. And it's disgusting what's happening in the United States, that there's no courage from university presidents. People that are in positions of institutional power are not fighting at all. So it's up to, again, in Heidegger's terms, the Volk, in Diderot's terms, the people, and then Rousseau, and Marx's, thing, the working class or the proletariat. And we really need to think through, alternatives. So the idea is to think through this outside of what is traditionally academic discourse or the discourse of the university, and think it through in terms of something radically different. So I hope we will develop a new vocabulary as well as new concepts and categories that radicalize the phenomena we're dealing with. Yeah? And when I talk about care, I think the major problem that's facing us is the transmission of memory and taking care of the generations, as Stiegler says, in his book, Taking Care of Generations. So this, to me, is a calling, if you will. And Sorge also is a calling, a calling of, the anamnesis, right, of recollection. And I'll put alongside it, we'll have to develop these terms, historical memory. This is completely under erasure, not only by, digitalization of everyday life and what we've witnessed since the 1992 turn with the internet relationship that everybody was so excited about. There's going to be a democratic sphere, right? Open. We're going to really be able to communicate with each other. Instead, what it has become, it's obviously, a police apparatus controlled by a handful of people. It's basically a surveillance moment, etc. It has no liberatory, a meaning, if you will. Maybe potential, yes, but no liberatory meaning at this point. So we're going to be, talking about this. To me, this is the calling of, if you will, taking care of generations. What is the problematic of transmission? What is essential to go forward? When I mean about what is essential, I don't mean it in terms of being essentialist, but what is essential in terms of what is necessary for the becoming human again, if you want to speak of it that way, or becoming something different than what the system has normalized and consistently does. Here comes Sean O'Mara. Okay. Okay. Hey, Sean, how you doing? Have a seat. Yeah. Yeah. So there are three here and 7 of you, 8 of you online. Okay. So this is symptomatic, of course, but it's great that we get to hook up with, the West Coast and the further out on the West Coast too. Yeah. Yeah. Gillian, are you in New York? Gillian, are you in New York? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm here. I'm in Queens.
in Queens, okay, okay. Good to know, okay, thank you, okay. So anyway, that's where I would like to go. I want us to, again, what I'm gonna attempt to do is attune us, since it's a Heideggerian term, Bestimmung, which really means in German literally determination, but determination with, if you will, sound, determination with meaning, etc. So this is a text, again, this is what I'm having us read today, this term, once again, Bestimmung, it's really crucial, because I think very adequately translated as attunement, right? But also means determination. So we're gonna be, trying to think through this language and try to get out of our everyday speech and our everyday patterns, etc. Okay, so we will, then yes, go thinking beyond the Anthropocene after we go through the question of disruption. The caring part is a very long section. I would like to make that as central to this. I would like to spend the most time on it. I find this essay extremely dense and extremely important for where we are. If I had to choose one essay that really says this is what we need to do and how we can go about it, and sets up a really adequate vocabulary, it is this one. So it's a very long piece. I mean, it's almost 80 pages, and I'm thinking we could do 20 pages at a time. I'll break it down. So that'll be in the third week, fourth week, and maybe even the fifth week, maybe with some other things interspiced. I'm also planning to do something that I came across because of our friend Bruno Gulli has used it in his own work. Eva Kittay is her name. She's a philosopher in the States here. I think her child, I'm not sure if was autistic or what. She developed a thing called interdependency, not dependency or codependent, but interdependency. So I want to go through this concept. Politically, she's, a liberal, maybe leftist, but that doesn't matter to me. When we're talking about care, there's something very interesting here about the way she looks at interrelations and interdependency. Eva Kittay. And then I wanted to go on to a couple of other things. I put philosophy in the pirates. There are groups of women internationally now who are taking ships and moving migrants, quote unquote, illegally across in the Mediterranean especially, and being turned away, but then actually landing and breaking the law. And these are a new group. I thought we would talk about what is called pirate care, a new term that's come up, and engage that kind of moment. The idea there is how care itself becomes criminalized in our era. We see what's happening here with UNRWA, right? We see what's happening with USAID, even though everybody knows that's a CIA front, but they do give food to places, and what's being cut off is another avenue, right? Of quote unquote care package, we used to call it, that would go. I want to look at this everyday practice and then almost institutionally legitimated criminalization of care that is happening before our eyes every day. And of course, the bombing in Gaza is an ongoing complete neglect and wastefulness of any kind of care for human subjectivity, etc. That's other than at this point, or the other. So anyway, that's kind of where I want to go. I mean, any thoughts from you about anything you want to read or do? I mean, the idea here is to re-engage Bernard Stiegler's work, which again I think Bernard Stiegler and some of his pupils, Yu Hui in particular. I'll put his name up here. I've been reading his book on Chinese, the question concerning technology in China. I can put this out on, in an email too. he's one of Stiegler's best students. He's in the University of Rotterdam in Europe right now. So anyway, I really think it's worth it to revisit Bernard Stiegler. We can talk about many of the things that come out of this long essay about care and caring, etc. I always find the left to bemoan care, never really create structures of care since the Panthers. You know, there are certain moments that it has, but really in terms of a real program since the Black Panthers, I'm probably unaware of certain moments in the world, but in the United States, it's really not since the Panthers have we had that kind of community or formation of a community in that regard. So I want to again go back to this. So we're gonna have a good time. I hope. You know, I think you're gonna really enjoy the epoche of my life by Stiegler, where he goes in why he philosophizes not to go mad. And this will be very to see. I also probably will read from the book, The Age of Disruption. We'll maybe talk about the wounds of truth, panic, cowardice, and coverage, and how this is working too, how the great Lacanian and Freudian category of disavowal is so active at this point. And what does that mean in terms of trauma and engagement? You know, as we go forward, this is something that, you know, people are very afraid of articulating trauma. It's very sad, you know, in a way, because in some ways meaning comes out of trauma, you know, the most profound meaning, if you really read the history of philosophy and the history of literature in that way, you know, the trauma is very important. Okay, someone's in the waiting room.
That's me, yeah.
Oh, that's you. Should I do it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so anybody have any thoughts before we maybe start with and I want to situate Heidegger again, because I know there's always the flack around him. So we can talk about that as well. But again, I have many friends now who are going back to Ezra Pound, despite Ezra Pound politics. I know people are going back to Wyndham Lewis, people that are reading Ernst Junger actively. And so there's something in the air about conservative revolution, or this kind of different approach that has been kind of denied by it's not politically correct. I'm really against it, because the more I read of Ezra Pound, I've been reading the cantos and the ABC of reading, which I should give to my students, but it's too difficult for them, the ABC of reading, unfortunately. So yeah, another crisis we're facing is the crisis of reading. Anyway, it's good to see you, Patrick. It's been a while, and since last year. Yeah, good. Yeah, and Jeremy, are you with us? I just introduced you to some of the people here. If you're with us, Jeremy, unless you're cooking. Yeah, that's Jeremy's book that's worth reading. Actually, I interviewed him on that book, The Black Radical Tragic, which is a very interesting radical reading of C.L.R. James. Yeah, he does a very good thing with the three versions of Mingus's BS, if you know that piece, Charles Mingus. So yeah. All right, so yeah. So anybody, any thoughts? And I mean, maybe other interests about, I'm doing this really, the care, because it just very much interests me. I mean, Josh is my good friend. Josh is the next generation, right? Gillian, who's with us, is the next generation. Jeremy's in the middle. Me, I'm the old guy in the room, in a sense. My friend, my jazz pianist friend in Montreal is the next generation too, in some ways. A little older than Josh, much older than Josh, 25% more older. But anyway, the question again is, what do we do? What are we really trying to do going forward? And what does it mean to basically live beyond just surviving, right? this oppressive mess. And if you want to talk about what's going on, I'm more than willing to do so. I am completely disgusted with the institutions of higher learning in the United States. They've shown absolutely no courage in any of these cases. I really don't know of one that has really stood up. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Columbia, UCLA are the two hot spots, but it's going on. Harvard today is now facing the loss of $9 billion worth of funds.
Wow.
They're going to investigate Harvard now because of the Harvard criticism and because of the protests that went on there too. So this is pretty ugly, to put it mildly. My opinion, worse than again, McCarthyism.
And Michael, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just having technical problems.
Okay, Jeremy. Okay.
But if you could, I mean, and you're gonna do this. You're gonna,
why would you technical?
yeah, you're gonna do this anyway. But it'd be great because I always am, and I always learn from you when we talk about picking up figures like Heidegger and certainly the way Stiegler did, to what it means to like have the left engage figures, some of which are conservative, some are ostensibly fascist. So I'm sure you always weave that in anyway, but just for the clarification so people know where you're at,
Well, yeah, I mean, this is certainly for the left. I mean, it's not, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, tell me where you're going with that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. It's just for people who aren't part of, haven't been with you for a long time, just to do what you said you were going to do, where, at a certain point, you talk about the whole idea of left Heideggerianism. I'm just emphasizing what you always do.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I mean, left Heideggerianism to me includes, the left Heideggerians were first and foremost the people post World War II and before World War II in France, meaning Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Simone de Beauvoir. Certainly, Heidegger influenced the lectures of Alexander Kojève heavily in Paris, which were attended by everybody, and now more and more is coming out about how profound those lectures really were on a whole generation of French thinking. So again, Heidegger was always in the background. Most of you know Marcuse wrote his dissertation. I don't know if it was accepted by Heidegger or not. I have not done the research on that. I hear rumors that he would not take it because Marcuse was Jewish, but that doesn't make sense because he accepted Hannah Arendt, Helene Weiss, and several other Jewish students. It just might not because Marcuse was Jewish. I mean, I don't know if that is the reason, but he wrote on the ontology. What is history under Heidegger? So the fundamental problems of historical materialism are influenced heavily by being in time. And to my mind, being in time, despite, some of its, language, despite, at that time it was 27, and he didn't become rector of the university until 33. It's the original work is dedicated to Edmund Husserl, who he later, betrayed in academia. But at that time, when he was writing this book, it's still, to me, along with Alfred North Whitehead's, which I have not studied that actively. I mean, I've certainly read it, but Process and Reality. These are the two fundamental works of philosophy. I would add Wittgenstein, but to me, Heidegger is here in terms of thinking through what is time, what is temporality, and what is time, in a sense. And the whole notion of the human subjectivity in the early part and relationship to time and temporality. And one of the reasons to begin there, he thinks Dasein, which we are, if you will, their beingness, existence in some German translations, but for Heidegger, it's really the there-ness of the being that's really, it's much more a location. It's much more where we are, right, than the who only, right? Yeah, it's the where-ness that Heidegger is really very much interested in. And this is a very radical project in the light of time and a reworking of time, as epochal time. So for me, the influence, and then it picks up even more after World War II with many, it's von Mazaros, in Hungary, one of Lukács's pupils, of course, Sorge, that we spoke about in the Search for the Method, which was the problem of method at the beginning of the critique, where he kind of asked Lukács, you have the wherewithal to read Heidegger, but you don't, right? It's tremendous influence on the Frankfurt School. The scholar Duderman, if people are interested in this, I've got a pretty active bibliography. The Memory of Thought by Alexander Duderman is an exceptional book on the connections between Adorno and Heidegger, specifically around the question of memory and anamesis, this kind of notion of memory in a sense. And so for me, again, I can break up, it's not a class on Heidegger, but Jeremy, I'm glad you asked the question. And then, of course, we have many other left Heideggerians, particularly in Greece, Kostas Axelos, who was charged by Heidegger to, read Marx and do a gauge. I should put his name on thing because I think some of his work is being translated now. Let me just erase this slide here. A major philosopher, only one of his books is translated on alienation and techne. It's one of the early Marxist approaches through Heidegger to the question of alienated labor and its relationship to technology. His book is in translation. To me, it's a masterpiece. I've read it in French on Heraclitus. It's 300 pages on the fragments of the Heraclitus fragments, one of the great studies of all time. So Axelos is exemplary of a left Heideggerian Marxist, going back to what Jeremy said. Axelos was, was a communist. He was part of the boat people. I wrote about this for Situations a few years ago. There was a group of people that had to leave Greece on Christmas Eve in 1945, or they would be assassinated. They were all on the hit list by the government then. And they got a boat called the Matarora, which was arranged by the French government to give them passage. And they all ended up in France. On the boat were Cornelius Castiaradis, who was not Heideggerian, but ended up in Paris and wrote The Imaginary Institution of Society, as well as many other books, Crossroads at the Labyrinth, many books on Plato's statesman, Greek philosophy, a kind of an Aristotelian Marxist. I think our friend Peter Bratzis is very influenced by Castiaradis, likes the Aristotelian Marxist position. Axelos was on the boat. A man named Kostas Papayannou, who became a major Hegelian Marxist in France, and also a woman named Mimi Kranaiki was her name. She became a scholar of myth and ancient history. So among other people too, but these were the most famous ones who went on to very, active careers in the French academic system. Axelos was the partner to Picasso's wife, first wife, who just passed away. He was also the editor of editions Minuit, Midnight Editions, of which published Deleuze and Foucault early on. And so he had a lot of clout and thing. He was also the translator, get this, of both History and Class Consciousness and commentaries on Being and Time. So, pretty magnificent figure in this way. So he is a leftist, and someone very, very not known in the United States. I think, And Stanley Aronowitz knew of him because of the book on alienation and technique through labor studies. Another person very important, and I'll stop here because this is an endless topic. Again, you could just write this book on left-wing Heideggerianism. It's a man named Jean-Marie Vincent, who wrote a book on abstract labor from a Heideggerian point of view too, in terms of Heidegger's relationship to subjectivity. So one of the best books on Marxist attempts at understanding abstract labor through a Heideggerian philosophical lens. Okay, so again, I want to emphasize, what Heidegger does is so radical, and you don't have to agree the way he does this, but the attempt is to rewrite ontology, rewrite the study of being, and to ground it again. It is as ambitious a project as René Descartes had in terms of grounding the sciences in 1620s. Descartes took upon himself in the discourse on the method and the meditations on first philosophy. So this was a major attempt to rewrite ontology and engage it, and also provide critical weapons for us to work through metaphysics, right? In a sense, he really was very much into this. Again, I don't really think that the Frankfurt School, the two figures that are seminal here, Lukács and Heidegger, I think they borrowed from both, even though Brecht and Benjamin made fun of Heidegger's German constantly. They did little short plays, so they were having fun. And Adorno obviously wrote two books, primarily from a more Hegelian Marxist point of view against Heidegger. One being The Jargon of Authenticity, which is the prolemma to the negative dialectics, which is a major, obviously one of Adorno's major attempts to look at how he looked at Heidegger's system as an accountant would look at something, how concepts and categories are borrowing for each other. And he went through the ontological and the ontic. The ontic for Heidegger is everydayness. It's what brings us down, in a sense. And he wants to make this distinction constantly between the ontological, the world of being, and then beings in the world, little lowercase beings in the world as Dasein. Yeah, and ultimately he talks about, das Man too, the mass man. So Heidegger, if you read him carefully, a lot of politics there. In some ways one could see how the question of the mass, the critical mass, Heidegger called it, from above, the dictatorship of the they self. That the they self, the mass, did not have the encounters necessary for authenticity. So this is something that has to be taken into account going forward. Yeah. So again, it's a very rich, period. Heidegger mentions Marx, I think 2-3 times in his whole history, never really engages Marx full front. He speaks of him in the Letter in Humanism as the last great humanist. And Marx is the culmination of the great humanist tradition, but remains in a kind of philosophical anthropological moment. And what he means by that, we're still in the Anthropocene. So when Stiegler talks about the Neganthropocene, the negative, the against the Anthropocene, in the sense of the negation of it, we are really on more Heideggerian ground than Marxist ground in this regard. Although, there are schools, and again, people don't really think about it this way, but philosophically, Althusser is very, very much in the moment of being an anti, philosophical anthropologist as a Marxist, whereas most of the Hegelian tradition still fall back into that tradition. So anyway, again, this is a course on care. It's not a course on, Heidegger's, relationship to Karl Marx. Like I said, he told Axelos, "You do this," and Axelos actually captured a seminar of Marx and Heidegger. He did a seminar on Marx and Heidegger. It's called Future Thought, by the way, if anybody's interested. Little book. It's about 8 essays, eight sections of classes, if you will, and it's called Future Thought. So going back, so that's part of the left wing Heidegger. The right wing of Heidegger, of course, is the theological, taken up, the theological moment, Of course, Rudolf Otto, the idea of the holy, Rudolf Bultmann, all of these people were very influenced by Heidegger. Paul Tillich, who was a left social democrat, is someone else tremendously influenced by Heidegger, especially in The Courage to Be, which is a book I still like, very, very interesting. And his distinction he makes between, ontology and theology, that ontology describes being, whereas theology, this is Tillich, not me, theology actually gives meaning to being. Yeah. So one structures being and describes being, whereas the other theology gives meaning to being. So these are the questions. So I don't know, some of you, I know Phil was there, David too, when we did Heidegger. There are 21 lectures, I think, on YouTube, Being and Time. And I'll try to locate, I'll go through what I can. They're on YouTube, and it's the king of the clubs here. Yeah, anyway, yeah. So I'll try to locate the section I did on care there, because it was pretty good. It broke down many of the moments in that section. So 40, 41, and 42, I think are fundamental to our case here. And I thought anxiety, since we all have plenty of that these days, was a good place to begin. He begins there with care, anxiety, and then existential attunement, and then he goes into this beautiful, the allegory of care. I don't know if you got to that, but it's a very beautiful passage. I can read it, tonight too. About the Cura, the legend of Cura, the Latin name for care. Yeah. So Cura, yeah. So anyway, one way of doing this through Greek tragedy is to say, Heidegger is kind of like Oedipus and colonist, right? He was very blinded by Machen and power during that period, during the Nazi or the Third Reich. At the same time, I think there were many moments that he was coming to terms with it. I followed this pretty much like a hawk, where I see many moves outside of his earlier rectoral address and his address on nature and society that he gave in The War Machine in 1933-34. Very different relations in the four years of Nietzsche, the 3 lectures on Hölderlin, the Kant book, and as well the return to Kant's thesis on being. And I want to give you that too, because that's where the phrase possibility is higher than actuality comes from, in modes of relations and modalities and the critique of pure reason. So anyway, so I'll stop there for a minute. Jeremy, is that adequate? Are you still with us, or I'm left wing Heideggerianism, and he's just cooking? Yeah. Anyway, all right. So,
Yeah, it was great, man. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
Good. Okay, yeah. All right. So any thoughts or any questions about this? We don't have Carl is not joining us that I know of, and I haven't heard any bemoaning about Heidegger lately in the groups. So anyway, I wouldn't like Heidegger as a human being. I've said this here. I would not want to be drinking wine with him or going to a jazz concert. I don't think he would really enjoy the jazz concert. It would be, what kinds of music is this, right? Like Adorno in a different way. But anyway, at least Adorno knew music. But on the other hand, this is a pretty magnificent, if you will, ambitious philosophy at work and philosophizing, and has spawned many moments in the history of our thought, etc., and has opened up, I think, a lot of fertile territory, and including Bernard Stiegler, who engaged him as has Stiegler through Derrida too. I mean, Jacques Derrida is not really possible in terms of deconstruction without Martin Heidegger and Edmund Husserl, right? And and one could make a strong case. I think that Marx is the first to use the term to unbuild about, which is where the word deconstruction, comes from, the German, to unbuild about. So yeah, the influence is amazing, and again, the Kitara school, the Japanese schools too of that have taken up Heidegger as well, and now even Yu Hui, Stiegler's student in China, has taken up the question of technology in China, right? In which he actually, I didn't bring it with me. I'll bring it with me next week, but I'll paraphrase. He said that, Heidegger in his black notebooks, which of course everybody focuses on the anti-Semitic remarks. I have not read all the black notebooks. I've looked at a few of them, but not really actively. But anyway, in the black notebooks, he talks about the question concerning technology in China, and that maybe they will be free with technology. He puts this in quotation marks, under communism. It will be free to face communism, to face the technological moment, right, in Heidegger's term. What he means by that, I have no idea, but Yu Hui takes this up in his book on cosmotechnics, right, etc. Okay, so very, very important to kind of keep these things in mind, because there are people in the world right now, especially, some of the first generation of Stiegler students, as well as Stiegler's, work. And most of you know that Stiegler, unlike Heidegger, Heidegger had the university. Stiegler created an institute of his own, the Ars Industrialis. Stiegler was never a member of a faculty that I know of. He may have been appointed once in a while, but he really created an alternative. He created the Ars Industrialis with a manifesto that was rewritten, updated, and a lot of empirical work went on. These people were, very, very involved. And, the whole structure of care, took into account, again, not just like, we're going to be Luddites and stay away from techno-feudalism, or we're going to be Luddites and not, try to use the AI or chat GP3 or whatever. But he was trying to encounter this in a certain way, because he understood how much it has taken over, in a sense. And he also understood, I think, too, how much it has, if you will, activated new forms of depression, new forms of what he calls symbolic misery, right? Don't get depressed. The real problem today, everybody's depressed, but they don't know it. This is the real problem I'm seeing, in a sense. You go into a classroom and you have 40 students, and 35 are just staring out into outer space, or completely glued to the machine. And you ask yourself, what is this a symptom of? In a sense, there's no activity going on in the brain. You can see it in the eyes, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a symptom of depression. It's affective work. So I think, again, very, very important in this notion yeah. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate that. There are industrialists. Yeah. So try to read the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Did you mention Rainer Schumann?
Yeah, well, Rainer Schumann was a professor of mine.
Would you call him left Heideggerian?
I don't know what.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rainer Schumann wrote two very good books that were Heideggerian inspired. He went to Rainer Schumann tragically, died at the age of 53. And just getting started. He was really at the peak of his powers. He had just finished his second book, Broken Hegemonies, which was a Heideggerian approach to the concept of hegemony. His first book was on principles of acting, precarious principles of acting, being and acting, which tried to show that there is a politics in Heidegger where one could turn another way. And I forgot to mention, Hannah Arendt, was very fond of Stalin in 49, and then completely denied Stalin in the late 50s when she taught her seminar at Princeton on revolution. Hannah Arendt was married to a communist. Yeah, member of the party, right, too. So, you know, who was one of his, you know, great students, and origins of totalitarianism is not possible without Heidegger's notion of the Gestalt, or the framework that we are situated within. So anyway, Schumann was hired by Hannah Arendt at the New School, you know, and Beryl, you'll like this. When I asked Schumann what he thought of Agnes Heller, she has a bird's eye view. That was it. But that was his way.
One way of putting it.
Being nice and being cunning, because Schumann knew time, right? Epochal time very well. This was his real specialty, you know, and so very, very important to think this through. Yeah, I mean, you know, Schumann's real thing was, you know, very close to Foucault's kind of politics, you know, governmentality, you know, it was never really quote unquote a left politics. You know, what he used to say about Althusser, you know, and of course he was educated, went to the Sorbonne, you know, although his teachers were Heideggerian, Remy Braun, Pierre Banc, these kind of people were all part of Schumann's, you know, really great commentators. You know, it's very important to understand in the history of philosophy that, you know, the left misses out so many times, but the French left did not miss out so much because they had all these great commentators around them. So you have these great commentators on the history of philosophy, François Châtelet, you know, all of these were people who were friends with Schumann or teachers of Schumann. So he had this thing going on too. So yeah. You know, he used to say, we have more effective ways of torturing you than Deleuze. This was another thing I always talk about. So, you know, he had this thing. Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. The early book on Heidegger is worth reading. I mean, you know, it's a very, very sophisticated book. It is the thing about Schumann, you saw real philosophy at work. You know, it wasn't just commentator. It was an invention that was happening, you know, before your eyes. It's like people that used to see Wittgenstein, Patrick probably knows this, that, you know, when Ramsey and others, Norman Malcolm would capture Wittgenstein in the classroom, you said you could see him thinking, you know, in a way. And with Schumann, you could see the invention happening, you know, in a certain way. Very, very interesting lectures, you know, in that way. So yeah, very, very good at this stuff. Politics, questionable. Questionable in a way, and didn't really build, you know, they're right now, there are a lot of his things are coming out, right? Because of a group of students that gotten it together, but he didn't want his lectures to be published. He left instructions, so they've gone against his willful instructions not to put into book form his lectures. He did not want them. They were handwritten, you know, for the classroom and not to be quote unquote published. So but they've gone ahead and done this, you know, in this case. No, but a big loss to the New School. The New School's philosophy department has never been the same. Yeah, a bunch of hacks compared to what Schumann did. You know, there were some really magnificent people. Yeah, at that place. You had Agnes Heller, who was the Hannah Arendt person, Rainer Schumann, and yeah, these were the two big guns in the 80s and more actively until the middle 90s. And then there was a change because Schumann died. You lost the connection, if you will, to the French scene in many ways. So, yeah. So, yeah. But his politics were always looking for an alternative. By the way, speaking of Greek islands, he would go to a Greek island with his boyfriend, Louis Comtois, who was a painter from Montreal, Canadian, Quebecois painter, minimalist, who had a gallery down the Mizell Gallery, did, you know, like flat pieces, sculpture, and, you know, and minimalist painting. And they had a place in one of the Greek islands. I forgot which one, but they would go, you know, and just walk and swim, and they would take off in May and come back in September. And Reiner would bring, back then it was the K-Pro. You know, I don't know if some of us are older enough to remember the K-Pro word processor, right? To write before. Yeah. Sherman died in 93, so right before the internet had become, beginning of its domestication. Yeah. Which is interesting too, yeah. So, yeah, but Sherman opens up, I mean, there's a lot of territory there because the word, and this is interesting too, again, and you know me, I mean, I like the two Heidegger languages, the house of being and Lacan, the unconscious is structured like a language. I think language is something we've forgotten, really, in a sense, to really use carefully, to think through, etc. I used to have a friend, he'd call me up and he would say, a philosophy friend, what's the dictum? And what he meant was, what's the word of the day we have to reflect on? And this was, practice that was, was kind of going on, So, but anyway, Sherman came up with a thing called an arche, right? Without principle. And arche in Greek, and I think I've done this before, has a threefold meaning, right? It means commandment. So it has a relationship to hegemony, right? It means also principle. This is where Sherman wants to engage it. And it also means, in a way, first. Right? The firsts, right? The arche, what is the first principle in some ways. So when you get archy in a oligarchy, it really means the commandment by the few, the rule by the hegemony of the few, right? And the principles of the few, right? Yeah. So he's really trying to take this down in terms of precarity. And I think, again, this is very important for us to think through our precarity, right? In many ways. And these arches are constantly changing. So the and as the is an away from principles, right? That once those principles have been realized, one withdraws from it, takes a step back, and goes on to something else. So I think this is a very interesting way of looking at politics too. How you can read politics, in a sense. Now, of course, I cannot give these hints to Mr. Marco Rubio, or Mr. Peggy Hegseth, or Miss Pam Bondi, Botox Pam, Botox Bondi. Anyway, Hegseth looks like he's out of the Gillette shaving commercials from 1950s, right? Those of us old enough to remember, look sharp, be sharp, the slicked hair back, the whole bit, so we have all these kind of models, if you look at this, I mean, this is a goon show. I mean, it's really pretty bad. The way this has gone well beyond any kind of farce in the Marxist sense, it's not even close to adequate to the object. So anyway, going back to Sherman, yes. So the anarchy is really what he's doing in terms of acting. Yeah. We act, through principles, but we're always withdrawing from those principles once we know. And he had, he really understood, the epochal thing of time. When Stiegler uses the epoche of my life, he's really talking about how he suspended the natural attitude, how he suspended all, what he knew, that things are put into abeyance so you can see differently. You begin to understand a very different kind of, practice at work. And I just picked up by chance. I mean, I go crazy sometimes, just pick a book off the shelf. And I started rereading Merleau-Ponty's The Phenomenology of Perception, speaking of another, left-wing Heideggerian, if you will, for a little while. And it's just magnificent, this kind of levels of reduction these people go to in order to see. It's incredible. So he has a section on what, and again, what are we fighting in terms of care? Well, the first thing we're fighting is trying to build, if we can, an attention economy, because we have a non-attention economy. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is where we really are. So Merleau-Ponty, and I happened by chance to this again, it has a whole section on, judgment and attention. How judgments are formed through attention, yeah? And again, to go back to this word of care that Heidegger engages, Bestimmung, you begin to see how important being attuned in the world, the existential position of one, how important this really is for any possibility of growth, possibility of really living, in a sense. So, yeah, and where one begins to build time as anticipation, right? Instead of time just passing linearly or durationally, in a sense. The time of anticipation, the time of happening. So these are all very intertwined in many ways. So the attention economy is also really close to what is called caring, in Stiegler and what he's going to do with it. I just wanted to maybe to just start for a second, just to let you know, this disruption he calls a new form of barbarism. This is going to be for next week, the industry of cultural goods. And for those of you who live in the United States, you know damn well that now we have a bunch of clowns running the Kennedy Center. And, we're going to basically see, instead of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, it's going to be the Christian Nationalist Center Performing Arts. Really, this is where this is really going in a sense. So anyway, he talked about he always talks about the dialectic of enlightenment. And to me, Stiegler is always two people in the background, or three, if you will. Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectical of reason, and Heidegger's being in time, and the question concerning technology. These are texts that are being read, reread, reinterpreted, and reactivated for the present time, constantly. So again, I recommend, I still think Juliet or Enlightenment, the third chapter of Dialectical Enlightenment is worth reading on the Disadian universe, etc. The sections on very, very good on Nietzsche there. And of course, the Odysseus passage too, very solid. All of it's good, the culture industry, etc. But I particularly love, for me, the one of the seminal essays of where we are, and to use a metaphor of Deleuze's coldness and cruelty, which he obviously gets from Sorge in his study, the Disadian universe that Horkheimer and Adorno encounter is very much what we're living in, in many ways, in a very banal way. It's not even interesting, in a way. Yeah. All you have to do, think about this, what we're really witnessing here. We have a Homeland Security chief who goes like a cheerleader around to a prison camp, a literal bullet, if you will, in El Salvador, sits in front of the prison, right? Makes a video. This will happen to you if you enter the United States illegally, right there, right? So of course, you can popular culturalize that by saying, "Oh, Jailhouse Rock" with Pam and Bundy singing in front, but it's not good because it's not there's nothing happening really, beyond this kind of continual scare tactics and police state. So again, what are we doing here? Remember, Donald Trump and company are only elected by less than 1/4 of the eligible US voters. Yeah, this is it. There's no such thing as a mandate here, right? Although that's what's being claimed. And this is so distorted out of proportion. But as we know, the noble lie can continue and continue and continue if it's repeated. It's not a noble lie in this case, it's a very vulgar lie. Yeah, because these are not noble people in the Nietzschean sense or in the ancient sense. So we have to think about that. What's being repeated constantly too? What is being repeated constantly? Anyway, to go back to this precarity, I think this is one of the things that's really hurt union activism. It's hurt many politics that people are not willing to take risks anymore. We have become a very risk averse culture. We don't really want to try to understand the precarity and the brevity of our existence in this way. The precarity of our attunements, and we go into a real stage of disavowal once again. As long as we're secure and safe in some ways, we'll stay with it. Phil, you want to say something, because you take risks, I know. You sure? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Phil's been in El Salvador. He hasn't been in that jail yet. Yeah, Phil's an American citizen, but yeah.
Yeah, my friend Walter was just captured there.
Really?
Yeah, today.
Oh my God. Is he Salvadorian?
He's Salvadoran, but he lives in LA.
And he lives in LA as a US citizen, or just as a
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
just
he's been here for 40 years, so it's I don't know. A friend of mine just called just before this started.
That's a shame, yeah. Is he sent to that place, or you don't know?
I have no idea. I've
The place.
been I put out a couple of feelers to see,
Yeah.
what people know, but nobody's come back yet.
Okay, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, it's gonna be getting worse and worse and worse in a sense, yeah. I mean, Colombia is the test case, and they really caved immediately. It really is sad that an institution like that in the heart of New York City, right? With the kind of tradition it had, at least from the 60s, and still the faculty it had. You have to remember, Colombia has some of the best Palestinian intellectuals and Arab intellectuals in the world that are on the faculty there, first rank, including Edward Said and Khalidi, I mean, not among many others, Syrian faculty, Egyptian Palestinian people there, the woman that wrote El Hajj's The Facts on the Ground. So it's really a disgrace that there's no pushback. I mean, a real disgrace. I don't know, how is it in Australia, Beryl? You're getting
oh my God, don't start me, Michael. Our government has just been so pathetically eager to not be on the receiving end of tariffs that they've kind of looked the other way. I mean, they just don't get it. They still think that they're living under the security umbrella of the United States. And I'm not quite sure what is going to have to happen for them to change their minds about that, I mean, it's really embarrassing.
Yeah, about Australia, I have a friend, John Keane, who's basically charged with anti-Semitism.
That's right.
And he's having to go through this rigmarole. So
yeah. It's really bad down here, Michael. It's not as bad as where you are, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, here, we don't expect the Argentinian time of disappearing people. This is what's going on.
This is what's happening. Yeah.
Kidnapping. There's actual kidnapping going on for people that are, not, not U.S. citizens, right? Student visas. It's a huge moneymaker in the university, and also has been part of the rich tradition of American, science and technology, as well as patents. So many people came here after Germany. I mean, I promise you this: my best teachers were German immigrants. In Baltimore, going back in my own history. Really people that knew their stuff, right, and were disciplined, etc. There were immigrants that came to the United States. And really what's being caught out here in the name, and this is the problem again, to speak about care, this care is not pastoral care in the best of the Christian tradition, if you will, and what Foucault sort of went towards in the care of the self. Later, Foucault, had some kind of relationship to pastoral care. Not that he was a religious person, but he saw that as something that could be talked about and activated. But, here, this is about white nationalism and religion.
Yeah.
Not anything more than that. You have to read it at that level. All you have to do is look at this idiot's cabinet. Yeah, really, in a sense, look who they picked. And all of those people, you talk about precarity, they're disposable any day, right? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, this is part of the chaos that's reigning here. So in some ways, yeah. And the tariffs, I mean, this is complete economic idiocy, right?
Idiocy, yes.
Idiocy. Yeah. I hope none of you have portfolios heavy in technology stocks because, it's, yeah, good. Yeah. But by American automobile manufacturers, good luck. How you're going to build a new infrastructure here too. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, okay, well, maybe I'll go to the Heidegger for a while. Any thoughts though? I mean, any other reports from the the Trumplandia, if you will? That's what I call it, Trumplandia. And I'm trying to develop with my students in a contemporary political thought the concept of Trumpism, instead of just fascism and so trying to make this into isms. By the way, a very good piece by Adorno in defense of isms. Yeah, wrote many years ago. Yeah, a very smart man. Yeah. You understood, yeah, you had the F scale, yeah. So yeah, so maybe we can go to the text a little bit, and I'll put out the age of disruption. Again, the beauty of the opening here, just to give you an idea of what Stiegler, how he's really thinking through the present. The sections are disruption, which is a new form of barbarism. And then this is very important, this section next week, we'll talk about this actively, the absence of epoch. I've talked to Josh about this, the lack of avant-garde, and now it's really an absence of a real epoch.
That's why it was.
This is really, yeah, but
The
sure.
anarchic,
Yeah,
like
yeah, the anarchic.
Those two things go together.
Exactly.
The ethical.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Breaks down.
Ethical principles breaking down, yeah. I mean, in Heidegger, just if you want, I'll just do this really quickly. And, yeah. I added to this with, conversation I had with Sherlock. She basically have the epoch of being as one in the ancient, the one in the many. That's the discourse of the Greco-Roman era. Then being as natura, as nature. And that's basically most of the meditation in the feudal society. And then being the epoch of being as self-consciousness, and this is Descartes. And Luther is the German, Luther is the first to basically discover the self. So these are the three epochs that the Heideggerian, narration, if you will, takes place. These are all part of destinal sending, right? And so I add to this, I mean, I'll just say that I see the 19th century as disruption, right? 19th century as disruption. And I think something new happens. So you begin to have being as value, Marx. Right? Can be Marx. And then you have being as desire, Freud. Freud and Lacan, of course. And others, yeah. The path breakers. And then being as power, Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, I mean, people forget, again, that Nietzsche's will to power is a politics. It's not a book just of fragments and self-empowerment. It is a book about politics. This is dedicated and is part of this Machiavellian moment. So I would add to this in the epoch, if you will, of self-consciousness, and we haven't made the transition yet. And this is where I think Stiegler is coming from when he comes up with terms such as the nega-Anthropocene. Because this is all still within the Anthropocene, you know, all this kind of notions of being. Although Heidegger, you know, never really indulges, if I could say, in philosophical anthropology. He was accused of philosophical anthropology by Husserl. So they're all trying to avoid this at that time in Germany. This was a calling in many ways. The thought. So these are the epochs, yeah. So epoch, and this is a way of looking at time as epochal time, if you will. So, yeah. So people talk about real time today, that's just media, you know, basically laying it on linear causalities and stuff. So this is very, very, very interesting in a way. So you go back and you read, you know, how does this break? What are the transitions? So you can read alongside this, you know, the Marxist, well, Engels more so, but really Marx too. You know, that you're looking at ancient society, slave society, you're looking at feudal society, you know, the discourse of landlord and tenant, you know, guild master and journeyman, you know, these basic things. Then you have transitions in the modes of production into the new era, and that the new era is ushered in with self-consciousness, right? Yeah. A real forgotten book by Tony Negre, by the way, is Political Descartes, in which he discusses Descartes in the light. The quest for certainty is done during the manufacturing era. So it's called Political Descartes. It's an early work of Negre, yeah, before the collaboration with Michael Hart. So anyway, so I do this because to me, you know, the notion of human subjectivity in the 20th and going into the 21st century is really basically the unholy trinity of Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. Yeah, yeah, breakdowns. Yeah, complete breakdowns, right? Yeah, complete. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they're trying to think in the breakdown.
They're trying to think within the breakdown, within the disruption.
Yeah,
Yeah. So this is again a very, I think, very, very interesting moment. Now Stiegler's trying to think the transition. How do we get to the next level? This is why I think it's important and why it needs to be read. You know, yeah. So very, very, yeah. So, you know, you have the existential nature, that's, you know, not really anything. You have the, you know, the clinical versus the cultural Freud, the metapsychological Freud versus the clinical. You know, you have the Marx of the British Library and the theorist versus the practical, you know, everydayness. Right? Yeah. And I think in Gossos is critique of the Gotha program society. Yeah, we're gonna have an engagement with what is to be done for a rereading of the critique of the Gotha program. So we don't get fooled by anybody. You know, I was thinking about this when I was walking over here at about 5:30 today. I was thinking about how many times have I been through this? 1992. Oh, Bill Clinton's gonna solve everything. He's like Bill Clinton, the butler in the House of Reagan. Then you come to the time of, you know, the Gore Bush thing, right? In a sense, right? Then you get to 2008, Obama, the new, you know, moment right here. Yes, we can, you know, etc. More targeted assassinations and policy changes in the Pentagon than should have in the past 20 years, earlier 20 years. So anyway, I think the left, if we can call it that, or leftists in general, constantly are fooled, you know, by little small, you know, movements, right, in a sense, or something that comes against, quote, this absolute takeover by the neocons now into, you know, what I would call, you know, the right wing of Silicon Valley, right? With you know, white nationalism and white supremacy behind it. You know, Musk is a white supremacist. No, I mean, this is obvious, right? And you've seen how many people of color there are. I was talking to a black friend. Michael, you forgot, we always get HUD. Oh, I said, yeah, I forgot about that guy. They always leave HUD, housing and urban development, to a black guy. Right, so, anyway, all right, so maybe we can go to the text. I hope this is opening, two German terms we should be very well aware of. Bestimmung, right, as attunement, right? I have it here, and then Sorge, which is his notion of care. And the question is caring part of Sorge, or is it something different as a participle and doesn't really fit the structure of Sorge? That's one question we could ask going forward here too, and the levels of concern. So maybe I can hear, I mean, you know, some of you read it, I see some people brought it with them, you don't have you have the translation?
What?
The right,
No,
the
wrong
sound bell?
translation.
Okay.
This is the Blackwell edition.
Blackwell? Okay, who did Blackwell?
I didn't take it.
It's like the blue cover one.
Yeah, the
I
blue
don't,
cover.
I don't know which,
Not the Sunni,
Okay,
but they have the section numbers on the site.
okay,
It
great,
should be the
okay.
same.
So we're gonna begin with, again, like I said, the fundamental attunement of anxiety as an eminent disclosiveness of Dasein. And again, Heidegger, I mean, this is a very dense book and to put it mildly, you know, in the first stages, I mean, the aim of the book is to retrieve the question of being. That's been forgotten. And in that retrieval, the meaning of being. Right? And he reads this as a history of Western metaphysics has forgotten this question concerning being, right? The question of Zion. And this, he spends his whole life on this, right? His whole life is a meditation on one idea, one concept. Being ultimately is not a concept, but he wants to think through this ontological register to its fullest. Yeah, the question concerning being, right? If you're interested, you know, the relationship to Asia is really went through the Japanese, through Kitaro, Mishima, you know, the Kyoto school, very, very important to Heidegger, for Heidegger appropriation. So there are all kinds of movements that were taking place in terms of the Japanese idea, if you will, of nothingness, right?
Which is a Zen.
Yeah, they're part of the Zen culture. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So this notion of thing. So let me go to the text. I mean, I picked the Stanbach because this was an advance in translation. You know,
can we
She-
talk about that for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm reading this section here.
you have the Macari,
No, this is the Townbound.
okay,
She translates angst. This in this version is translated as anxiety.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering now what, I mean, she kind of goes through it a little bit in the section before that we read, what we read. I think we started at section 40.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, what do you think about that translation and why angst, what angst sort of signifies over anxiety?
Well, anxiety is the translation of the German word angst.
Oh, so that's just, so it's a more literal translation.
Right.
Okay.
And angst's object,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety's object, existentially is nothing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? This is the thing. Whereas first, fear has an object. Right?
Mhm.
So to have,
So so anxiety means it's sort of emotion, like like where angst is like more definitive in a way.
yeah, I mean, this is the way it, you know, got translated, you know,
Mhm.
anxiety in English. Right? Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, Freud, you know, wrote a book called The Problem of Anxiety.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was,
Okay.
yeah, so, I mean, angst is a noun,
Right.
not a problem, okay?
Right.
And
That's
again,
what I'm
the
saying.
thing to remember here is that it is this encounter with nothingness,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
That establishes one's project,
Mhm.
one's designness, one's attunement in the world in many ways. So one begins to have what is called authentic being, right?
Mhm.
Which is an authentic relationship to the world, right? That is part, what happens in that encounter is that there becomes some kind of anticipatory resoluteness.
Right.
So you begin to see all these kind of things working together alongside, anxiety. But this is where he begins here in terms of the being of design is care. The being is not anxiety. Right? Okay, so.
Okay.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
But I think Angst was translated the same way by Macari and Robinson too. I think they use the word anxiety.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah,
think so too,
yeah.
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 And you-
Anxiety,
Your
yeah.
translation is in Blackwell?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
I have a question. I mean, a clarification in terms of the distinction between Sein and Seiende. Because in the translation, oftentimes it's lost. They end up being translated in a way which is confusing. And I think it's absolutely critical in terms of getting at what Heidegger is getting at. Because being is much more universal. The Seiende is the specific, the determinate, Dasein. But can you clarify that, Michael?
The word on so people know, yeah. You have design, right, as being, and you say as a universal, right? And then you have design as, right? Which in some ways is part of Design's being in the world, right? And this is where disclosure or unconcealment takes place. It's only through that in the everydayness of Zionist, of the everyday. You could think of this maybe at some levels as singularity. Yeah, singularity of their being, right, as Zionist. So one is ontological, is a major ontological category. The being, the question regarding this as a universal and its meaning, whereas this is more ontic, which presupposes once again the singularity of Dasein being there and in the world. So being in the world, and in the structure, one begins to get two forms of what is known as aletheia. That's Heidegger's notion of truth, not Wahrheit in German. It's the Greek word aletheia, which means to unconceal or disclose, with hyphens. Unconcealment, where something is, in Christian language, revelation, or something is revealed. But I like the unconcealment. Some people use veil and veiling, I guess, in other ways. Other people, I like the disclosure, right? The disclosure, disclosing, right, in many ways. So one way of yeah. So again, Patrick, you raised a very good question. It's the this is where, time, Sein und Zeit, right? Zeit as a general term is going to be thought universally here, right? Whereas this might be thought through, if you want to, design it as Zeitgeist, as the spirit of the time. So I think there are many, levels here that are going on. But the main thing is a distinction between the ontological and the ontic that he's making here too. Yeah, that he's trying to develop. And and to return to universal being. However, ultimately, being is never really articulated fully, right, in a sense. Schurman asked, actually, he visited with Heidegger, asked if being was God, and Heidegger was silent for a half an hour. So, just to give you a story on that. Yeah, in some ways. So maybe being is silence. Maybe it is. Maybe the infinite spaces of the universe frighten me, as Pascal used to say. Yeah.
The unsayable.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So in some ways, yes, it's a very good question. We can kind of come back to that, but again, it's care that is fundamental to the structure of Zionist, right? and the design. Very, very important here. And again, I think it's the question, and I think one way of reading Heidegger more productively is to engage Heidegger at the level of orientation. I really like this term. How does one orient oneself? It's Spinoza. Spinoza was always thinking the orient and thinking the orientation. As most of you know, Europe was in a shambles. We're not the first to be thinking about, what kind of chaos and idiocy. I mean, Robert Musil, look at the literature, the decline of and fall of the empire by Gibbon, Spengler's The Decline of the West. A lot of these things are written, however, by conservatives. That's the interesting part, part of conservative revolution. So I think this is, again, important to understand that, many of the doomsayers, etc. The Magic Mountain, which is more, the great discourse between Settembrini and Nafta, which is really Heidegger and Lukács in that novel. Of course, you have many texts, around this, in a sense. I mean, has anybody seen the series Babylon Berlin on Weimar?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm waiting for the next season. One more, I think there is. Now, yeah. So this again would remember Heidegger comes out of the countryside. This is not someone that's interested in a rectorship in Berlin. He wrote a book called Why I Stay in the Province. This is someone who really believes in philosophizing, right? It is not a philosophy that is supposed to transform the world only, right? This is a philosophy that is really to raise questions that have been forgotten. If he's valuable in any sense to the left, it's the ability to ask questions, teaching us how to really ask questions and deconstruct texts. I mean, there's nobody better in terms of opening up, in my view, opening up a text, the way he does in the history of philosophy. If you read his discourse on the cave, on Plato's cave, and the idea of truth in Plato, you begin to see how many levels this man is thinking at, and what's going on. Again, this is the only book that was intended for publication. He wrote this book to keep his job. Yeah, this is why he published it. They asked him, 1925, 26, you have a piece of work for us, and this is the result of it. The second part, as some of you know here, was never completed. It was, he never did it, and he reversed it in a late lecture in the early 60s called Time and Being, instead of Being and Time, right? So that's another interesting moment too. So really you could read this being as time in a way too. And you could think of this notion of time that you brought up, Patrick, different at the level of Sein des versus that of Sein, right? In terms of, towards a moment of universal time. I mean, if you want to take this up deeper, we can go to this. Section 82 is at the last part of this. In a way, he has the famous footnote, and this is on page 410 of the Stambau tradition, about the contrast of the existential and ontological connection of temporality, Dasein, and world time with Hegel's concept of the relation between time and spirit. So this is very, very deep, and he takes on now time, he takes on Bergsonian simultaneity. And remember, the theories of general relativity and specific relativity are happening during this time. And Schumann's very aware, if you will, in terms of precarity, Heisenberg is very aware of indeterminacy, etc. As is Kojève. By the way, Kojève wrote his dissertation on the concept of determinism in modern physics. So, these are, people really unknown. So anyway, let me just go back to the text. I mean, after anxiety. I mean, yeah, in a way, reading anxiety seems to be something that we, again, have forgotten how to do. We just say we're anxious, right? Or I'm feeling, but we don't really read the anxiety, right? We read desire in some ways because of Lacan, but we don't really read anxiety anymore, right? As an existential problematic, right? In a sense. So this is something that I'm going to begin. Maybe I should have assigned 39. I know I started at 40, the introduction. I'll go on. Being in the world is a structure. And remember, he's giving us a structure here that is primordially and constantly whole. So he's really dealing with the wholeness of being, the totality, if you will. And it was clarified in chapters 2 through 5, phenomenologically or phenomenally as a whole, and always on the basis in its constitutive moments. So remember again, one is reading by moments how we got to this, basic this phenomena called being in the world, right? But the manifoldness of the Constitution, and Patrick probably knows this work. Bertano's on the manifold, on the manifold of being, the reading of Aristotle's several senses of being.
It's in my library. I haven't read it.
It's a very interesting text because both Husserl, Heidegger, and Freud all come out of that. Freud was present at those lectures. And the joke is Freud took it to the basement. Husserl took it to the transcendental mountain, right, to the horizon. And Heidegger just kept trying to study it and et cetera. So anyway, so it's kind of interesting. Okay. So anyway, he's speaking about the facticity, if you will, of everyday life. Not facts, but the facticity. What are the multiple things, the determinations that got one to where one is, in a sense, this is very, very important to keep in mind instead of just a quite descriptive biography or something like that. Okay. This is very being in the world, and this is section 181, those of you that have this. 1A, being in the world, to which being together with things at hand belongs just as primordially as being with others, is always for the sake of itself. But the self is initially and for the most part inauthentic. So we basically exist as inauthentic. We basically are mired in Sartrean categories as mauvaise foi, as bad faith. Most of our examples, and even in Freud, the ego does not, it's a very small part, and we do not really know what we do, right? In a sense, he's unconscious. But the self is an inauthentic, the they self. So the they self, the outside, the exteriority, the they self. And this is where Stiegler is interesting with the hyponemata, that memory is exteriorized in the machines, right? This is what technology has done. Whereas, in Heidegger's time, the they self, right? The Das Mann, the man in the crowd. And remember, we have a lot of writing about this, this period, Gustave Le Bon, which Freud studied very well, ego psychology, group psychology and the analysis of the ego, the mass psychology of fascism by Reich. So all of this notion of the Das Mann is out there very, very actively, in a sense. And something we've forgotten about too today, too, is all we care about is voting patterns. This is what we look at, the crackers down south will follow Trump anywhere, et cetera. Right? So this is very important. Being in the world is always already entangled. So this is very, very important. That basically what we're doing is we're unlearning with Heidegger. We're disentangling where we are. This they self that has put itself in us. The average everyday can be determined as an entanglement disclosed. How are we so we're afraid in some ways, we're fearful of disentangling ourselves, right? In a way, understanding where do those entanglements come, right? In a sense. In psychoanalytic terms, where's the bound energy? How did that take place, right? In a way, in the binding of the energy at certain moments, right? Okay, thrown, projected being in the world, which is concerned, and these are both very important concepts. Let me put this on the board too. I still like the step okay in my life. Yeah. So for Heidegger, thrownness, vortex, being thrown into the world, and then a project is what's always being ruled. We're always in a process of disentanglement. In some ways, we could say in English, unlearning the damage. In education is part of a process, not of learning per se, but of unlearning, right? The damage that has been inflicted upon us, the unlearning, the damage done, right? So we are thrown into the world, we're thrown into this facticity, the natality, if you will. And in this thrownness, we're, thrown into this inauthenticity until we developed, in a sense, or we begin to have a project. Yeah, the project. Very, very important to have a project. You're dead without a project before you do. Right? Dead. Can't go on, right? So this thrownness and this projection is always going on. So think of yourself when you turn out of bed, you throw yourself out of the bed into the project of the everyday, right? Etc. With the suspension of the world, you're starting every day with a kind of new facticity, in a sense. So this is where we're going on. Underneath all of this, in this thrownness and projects, and in this vortex in particular, the anxiety is always already there, right? Always already there. That's the main feeling, right? And structure. And that anxiety is really in the structure of being, and lowercase being here, towards death. Right? So this inauthenticity is also being determined by one's confrontation, if you will, with one's anxiety, right? One's embracement of it, etc. Once again, I'll throw this out again. This lack of risk taking, I'm not just saying unnecessary irrational risks. I'm talking about real risks. I don't know what takes on something much greater than oneself, right? In a sense, is always already there. Right, always already there. Yeah, this lack of it, because people will go back into the facticity of everydayness. Will be actually brought back down. Walker Percy, the novelist, the moviegoer, a great book, by the way, worth reading. The Southern novelist Walker Percy, read Heidegger while he was in the sanitarium in North Carolina, had tuberculosis, and the existential tradition kind of saved him during that period, and took many years before he became a first-rate writer. The Moviegoer won the National Book Award, I think, 1961. It's a great look at what movies do to us in a ways. But also about one man's search, right? And a character named Vince Bowling. And, in this way, everydayness was the enemy, right? Being brought back down into the everydayness, in a sense. And, going back to this left-wing Heideggerianism, this is what the work world does in so many ways. It throws you back into everydayness. It throws you back into a different structure of time, far away from what could be a different project. So for Heidegger, this is where, Das Man lives, right? This is where the ability for something called politically the dictatorship of the they self. the outside self. There's no self that's really being developed unless one has this existential encounter with the anxiety of being towards that. Right? So this is the beginning point. So it's really trying to go here. Structure. So let me just go back to here again. Sorry, I've got so many markings in this bookmarks in this book. Yeah, anyway. So you cannot cobble together elements to get to the whole, to the totality, right? Looking through the whole as a primordial unified phenomena, which lies in the whole, the structural possibility. He goes through these things here again. But I want to just say again, attunement necessary and understanding. So you're always trying to think through this level of attunement and understanding simultaneously to be able to move on in the of disclosiveness. It requires this Bestimmung, if you will, multiple determinations or an attunement. And maybe it's a good part of to think of language differently in a sense where you begin to see, if you will, everyday life in terms of the system of attunements. Right, very, very interesting too. How are you attuned to a certain day? How does this fit into attention economy? I think this is very, very important. Very, very important about, paying attention, which is very, very crucial for our time. To really pay attention, concentrated attention, given the diversions, the multitasking, et cetera, which we're subjected to. Think about what Twitter, what is it called? X now, X, Instagram, all these things, there's some new things out there.
I don't think.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. But anyway, just think of what they do. In a way, there's a complete spreading, if you will, of constant disinformation, right? It is actually one grand, gigantic diversion, right? In many ways. Everybody talked about how great it was, the social media revolution in Egypt. Yeah. Where did it get us? Really, when you think about it, what's the result? We got one of the worst police states in the region, right? Sissy in Egypt in many ways. So in a sense, again, I'm not nostalgic for just the bar rooms where we case the joint to make sure there are no agents in the room or, and making sure there were plenty of Bolsheviks in the kitchen before we ate, et cetera. But I think it's very important, again, to think this through about how a text like this and the whole structure of care and caring is maybe one way to engage, a disattention economy. How do you really build an attention economy? Is the economy now is a disattention and the lack of historical memory. This is, again, I think crucial to understand, for where we are. Yeah, you see it all the time in the classroom. You see it everywhere. I go to a class, 50% are African Americans, not one person's heard of Paul Robeson. Langston Hughes, oh yeah, I heard of him, right? James Baldwin, maybe, right? Right, maybe, right? Chester Himes, might as well be talking about some Arab scholar of the 7th century, after the flight to Mecca, or something with Chester Himes, who was a great character. Yeah. The joke on Chester Himes, he got all the streets wrong in Harlem. He said, I wasn't writing a book about geography. He said that when he was asked about, why he distorted all the streets in Harlem. Cotton Comes to Harlem was the book that was criticized. So anyway, okay, so very interesting thing. The analytic, and going back to where Patrick started us here in this kind of trajectory between Sein and Sein des, right? Being uppercase, capitalized, Sein versus lowercase beings and being in the world. And this is in section 183, for those of you using other books, 177 in the Stendhal translation. The analytic of design, and remember, we're going through, and again, this is not a class on being in time. I'll see if I can, get everything together in the lectures that I gave, because I went through the existential analytic very, very carefully. This is a fundamental part of the book too, in a way. The analytic of design, which penetrates to the phenomena of care. Okay, so design analytic, the where being, the being there analytic, penetrates the phenomena is to prepare the way. So it's propedeutic for the fundamental ontological problem. That is the question, going back to what Patrick asked, being as universal, the question of the meaning of being in general. So you have this working throughout this uppercase being and then the lowercase beings throughout Heidegger's, being and time. Okay, so he goes on, in order to direct our view in the light of what we have gained and to go beyond the special task of the existential a priori anthropology, we must look back at the phenomena that is the most intimately connected with the leading question of being in order to get a better penetrating grasp of them. These phenomena are the modes of being explained hitherto: handiness and objective presence. Again, going back to this left wing, a lot of this is interrelated. Left wing Heideggerianism, particularly in Axel Oss and in Jean-Marie Vincent, is really reading Heidegger on ready to hand and present to hand. There's a whole section of this in Being and Time, the ready to hand this thing. Whose handiness and objective determines inner world beings, unlike design. Because the ontological problematic has been hitherto understood primarily in the sense of objective presence, while the being of design remained ontologically undetermined. We need to discuss the ontological connection of care. That ontological connection, worldliness, handiness, and objective presence, which is reality. That leads to a more exact determination of the concept of reality in the context of the discussion of epistemological questions oriented towards this idea raised by realism and idealism. And I have in my notes to compare to section 43. I'll take a look at what I mean by that. I don't know, back in the day. Beings are independently of the experience, cognition, and comprehension through which they are disclosed, discovered, and determined. But being is only in the understanding of that being to whom something like an understanding of being belongs. So being can be unconceptualized, but is never completely uncomprehended. In ontological problematics, being and truth are brought together since ancient times, if not even identified. This documents the necessary connection of being and understanding. So again, you can see the triad, developing here: being, care, and understanding, right? Yeah. What are we caring for? Through understanding, being, right? And he talks about how our interpretation is gained with the phenomena of disclosedness, discoveredness, interpretation, and statement. So this is very interesting too. Again, another good exercise in reading how things are disclosed, how they're discovered, right? Uncovered, disclosed, right? Disentangled, interpreted. Remember Heidegger is doing a hermeneutical. But does everyone know that hermeneutics is the science of interpretation? It was a word that was used by Friedrich Schleiermacher to reinterpret the biblical text, particularly the New Testament. In a way, yeah. All right. So the conclusion of the preparatory fund analysis of Dasein has as theme the fundamental attunement of anxiety as a distinct explosiveness of Dasein, and then the being of Dasein, our being of Dasein, our being there-ness as care. Confirmation of the existential interpretation of Dasein as care in terms of the pre-ontological self-understanding or interpretation, of Dasein, worldliness and reality, disclosiveness and truth. So he goes through all the little sections he's going to develop. So here we go, in a way, I don't know, I know you read this, Josh, the existentially onto turning away is part with the flight is involved in. Does one take flight from anxiety, really, this is a very interesting moment, how one takes flight. Very different than Deleuze and Guattari's lines of flight, very different. Keep this in mind. This is the flight from anxiety, right? Yeah, together, right? What is the flight from? And within away from, which lies in turning away from that which Dasein can be understood and conceptualized by turning toward in a way which is phenomenologically interpreted. Where does that flight lead us? Where does it go, right? So the orientation towards the phenomena of entanglement is not condemned in principle to be without any prospect of ontologically experiencing something about the Dasein disclosed in that phenomenon. On the contrary, it is here that the interpretation is the least likely to be surrendered to an artificial self-conception of Dasein. It only carries out the explication of what Dasein itself discloses ontically. So the possibility of penetrating the being of design by going along it, with it, and pursuing it interpretively in an attuned understanding increases, the more primordial that phenomena in which functions methodologically as disclosive attunement. How do we begin to get this attunement of absolutely disentangling and disclosing something? To say that anxiety accomplished something like this is only an assertion at this point. And remember, Heidegger is very much against esoteric logic. He would look at Trump and just go crazy. He would not, he'd just say, all they do is assert things. They have nothing but that, the esoteric logic. We are completely unprepared for the analysis of anxiety. It is true we're still in the dark about how it is ontologically connected with fear. So you begin to see angst and fear coming together. Obviously, they're kindred phenomena, what tells us that both phenomena remain mostly undifferentiated, and we designate as anxiety what is really fear, called fear, but has the character of anxiety. We will want to penetrate anxiety, this phenomenon of anxiety, step by step. So this, to me, this section here, for those of you interested in existential psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis, if you will, this is a very important section of the differences between anxiety, angst at the bottom, and then fear, and how they get confused, constantly, right, in many ways. So, yeah, so this is where, in a way, Sorge gets a lot of the existential psychoanalytic too, right? So shrinking back from what fear discloses, this is top of page 180, 186 is the section, 185, 186, is threatening, is founded upon fear and has the character of flight. One interpretation of fear as attunement shows that what we fear is always a detrimental inner-worldly being, approaching nearby from a definite region which may remain absent. By falling prey, Dasein turns away from itself, falls prey to this anxiety. Yeah. In falling prey, it turns away from itself. What it shrinks back from must have had a threatening character, yet this being has the same kind of being as the one which shrinks back from it. It is Dasein itself. What it shrinks back from cannot be grasped or something fearsome, because anything fearsome is always encountered as an inner worldly being. The only direct thread which can go fearsome, which is discovered in fear, comes from inner worldly beings. The turning away of falling prey is thus not a flight, which is based on a fear of inner worldly beings. Any flight based on that kind of fear belongs still less to turning away, as turning away precisely turns towards inner worldly beings or absorbing themselves in it. The turning away of falling prey is rather based on anxiety, which in turn first makes fear possible. Okay? So he's going to take us through this. The movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original one with Kevin McCarthy, is very interesting in this case. This interworldly possession that goes on in the fear, right? In a sense, it turns into a kind of mass hysteria. But anyway, we can go back to that. In order to understand the entangled flight of design from itself, so the escape from oneself, and remember Fromm writes Escape from Freedom in 1940. And that book is somewhat indebted to this too, or at least the talk about this. What are we fleeing from? In Fromm's case, in Sorge's case, we're flying from fleeing freedom. In Heidegger's case, I think it's the responsibility of care, which includes guilt and responsibility, indebtedness in a certain way, indebtedness to the community. We'll talk more about this in concrete terms, but I think, again, very important. Okay, the about which one has anxiety as being in the world as such. Here is what anxiety is anxious about, phenomenally differentiated from what fear is afraid of. What anxiety is about is not an inner worldly being. So he begins to give you a section here now on what anxiety is. But thus it essentially cannot have any relevance, right? The threat does not have the character of a definite harmfulness, which concerns what is threatened with a definite regard to a particular factical potential for being. What anxiety is about is completely indefinite. As I mentioned earlier, the encounter with nothingness. It is not definite, not like fear, right? Etc. Indefinite. This indefiniteness not only leaves factually undecided, which inner world being is threatening, it also means that inner worldly beings in general are not relevant. Nothing which is at hand and present within the world functions as that which anxiety is anxious about. The totality of relevance discovered within the world of things at hand and objectively present is completely without importance. It collapses into itself, and the world has the character of complete insignificance, right? In many ways. In anxiety, we do not encounter this or that thing which is threatening could be relevant. Very, very, very interesting here. Thus, neither does anxiety see a definite there, number one, and over there, here, from which is threatening approaches. The fact that what is threatening is nowhere characterizes what anxiety is about. This is what intrigues, right? In some ways, right? Anxiety does not know. This is interesting. Anxiety does not know what it is anxious about. But nowhere does not mean nothing. Rather, region in general lies therein, and disclosedness of the world is general for essentially being spatially in. Therefore, what is threatening cannot come closer from a definite direction within nearness. It is already there and yet nowhere. So you begin to see this paradox playing out, right? Not here and there, right? Very good title of a film by Bernard, by the way, in the 70s, and in terms of the Palestinian question. It is so near that it is oppressive and takes away one's breath, yet at the same time, it is nowhere. And David Winters, good to see you. This could be something very interesting in terms of media studies. It's something that's both here and there, yet it is nowhere, right? Very interesting, this kind of relationship to seeing and experience, right? That happens in mediation, and then of course in the media. And what anxiety is about, it is nothing and nowhere becomes manifest. The recalcitrance of the inner worldly nothing and nowhere means phenomenally that what anxiety is about in the world as such, the utter insignificance which makes itself known in the nothing and nowhere does not signify the absence of world, but means that inner worldly beings in themselves are so completely unimportant that on the basis of this insignificance of what is inner worldly, the world and its worldliness is all that obtrudes itself. What crowds in us and upon us is not this or that. And this is against Hegel, nor is it everything objectively present together as a sum, but the possibility of things at hand in general, that is, the world itself. When anxiety when it subsides, or has subsided, in our everyday way of talking, we're accustomed to say it was really nothing. Way of talking indeed gets at what was ontically. Every discourse aims at taking care of things at hand and talking about them. That what about anxiety is anxious is not interworldly things at hand, but this not anything at hand, which is all that everyday circumspect discourse understands, is not completely nothing. The nothing of handiness is grounded in the primordial something, which is in the world. The world, however, ontologically belongs essentially to the being design as being in the world. So if what anxiety is about exposes nothing, that is the world as such, that means that what about which anxiety is anxious is being in the world itself. Very interesting, huh? That what your anxiety is really about is in the world being. Your being in the world, right? In a sense, coming to terms with it. So anxiety then, right? Being anxious discloses. So you have to be aware of the anxiety in order to have this disclosure, right? You cannot go around and just suppress the anxiety or put it, out the thing or flee from it, because what you're missing in that moment for Heidegger is the possibility of disclosiveness, disentanglement, all of these moments. So one has to, I'm not saying go out and say, I love my anxiety. That's not the point. The point is that encounter with the anxiety is absolutely necessary for this process of interpretive disclosiveness, right? And also imperative for the unlearning process, that we are also desperately in need of. So he says that it is the mode of attunement that first discloses the world as world. We begin to see our being in the world. And this is very crucial for Heidegger again, in which I think he has the advantage. This is just me, if you're going to play chess, he has the advantage on the chessboard, if you will, because he begins with world, with Welt, right? So you have world, then you have the Umwelt, the environment, right? In Heidegger, and then you have the being in the world, the Sein, in das Welt, right? In the world. So very, very important to think of this world and this worlding. This is a verb. The world, in a way, this is substantive, which the German language is very good at, but it's worlding. And this is, again, a very important strategy in Heidegger, to think of the worlding. And not just our political world, our social world, etc., but really the worlding. What do we mean by world? And then what does this encounter? So you cannot. So it's very interesting. Anxiety is not a narration. It's not an aboutness. It's very important. Anxiety is not only anxiety about, but it's the same time, it is as attunement. So the first thing, let's say you think of this as therapeutics of care, which, I try to do. It's the therapeutics of care, that the attunement is the first step, right? The anxiety as the attunement, right? In a sense, not the narration. That for which is anxiety is anxious is not a definite kind of being and a possibility of the life. The threat itself is, after all, indefinite and cannot penetrate threatening to this or that factually concrete potentiality of being. What anxiety is anxious for is being in the world itself. Okay? Being in the world itself. In anxiety, the things at hand in the surrounding world sink away and do so, and so do interworldly beings in general. The world can offer nothing more, nor can the design width of others. The anxiety takes away from design the possibility of understanding itself, falling prey in terms of the world and the public way of being interpreted, back to the dictatorship of the self, right? That he speaks of the they self. Design, it throws the design back on that for which it is anxious, right? it's the authentic potentiality for being in the world. So anxiety arises if we're living inauthentically, right? In a sense. You know, he's very Greek in this sense. If one does not encounter one's destiny in the tragedies, right? In a sense, one has too much hubris for this. This is where, you know, there's trouble in paradise, so to speak, right? But in this case, you know, this flight from anxiety in some ways, right, is a way of basically taking away our innermost possibilities for authenticity, for anticipatory resoluteness. So anxiety is crucial, right, in terms of interpretation of our being in the world, but also crucial in terms of developing in our thrownness, which we all are. We're all abandoned, according to Sorge. We're abandoned to the condemned to be free in Sartrean sense. In Heidegger's sense, we're abandoned to, basically confront our anxiety, right? We're abandoned in the sense of where we have to develop projects or we die. Yeah, we really die.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the way he thinks, yeah, again, yeah. I mean, we can do Spinoza next year and there's another confrontation. But very affirmative thinker in a different, this is, yeah. So anyway, anxiety individuates. Yeah, and you see this word, the Simondon and Stiegler like, individuates Dasein to its own most being in the world. So the own, where you can really own the self, where you own one's actions, etc. For being in the world, which is understanding, projects itself essentially upon possibilities. So without this encounter, you don't really have possibilities, right? You are mired and brought down into the everyday constantly. Thus along with that by which it is anxious, anxiety discloses Dasein as being possible. So we are now being interpreted and interpolated in a certain way, if you want to think of this as Tertullian - Althusserian logic. Hey, you over there, you're not dealing with your possibility, right? The possibility, yeah, is higher than actuality, as being possible, and indeed it's what solely from itself can be individualized in individuation. Anxiety reveals in Dasein its being towards its own most possibility. Now, it is only there that one begins to realize one's project, potentiality being, that is being free, and I like this too. This is what being free really means, for the freedom of choosing and grasping itself. Choosing and understanding. Yeah, go ahead.
Bernard makes use of this in grammar of democracy.
Paul Verno, yeah. You guys know Paul Verno, the part of the autonomia.
Yeah.
I'll put his name on the board. So pretty profound thinker. Very good poker player, by the way. When he got out of jail, had to make a living. He couldn't teach, so he played poker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need it in relation to precarious, like, for work. That's all that type of proneness, closure to the life.
Sherman was known to the Italians, Negre called Broken Hegemonies the most important philosophical work since World War II. Yeah, so whatever that's what. I personally don't, but yeah, he said that. He told that to the editor of the journal Multitudes, Charles Wolfe, many years ago. Yeah. He told it to me. Yeah. So anyway, the ownmost potentiality. So really in this disclosedness that anxiety gives you, right? That's when your possibilities begin to take shape. And in a way, one does not, fulfill one's project unless one has that encounter with the anxiety. Again, yeah. So what do we have? We have pills for anxiety. We have, all these things that are going on. you know, et cetera. We're kind of overly medicated in this juridical medical order, et cetera. You know, as Deleuze and Guattari said, this was in the 70s, they said this, we're treating Valium. So who knows, I don't know what it is today, Adderall, and I'm sure there's some antidepressants out there too. So in a way, you know, the chemical, the you know, the capitalist chemical, you know, psychiatric regime has taken hold of all of this. There's no more of this kind of, you know, practice that's going on. Again, I recommend a book. If you have friends that have very hard time making choices and living with those choices, I really recommend the book of Irving Yalom, Existential Psychoanalysis. It's a really great book about, you know, the patient's right to choose, right? And how choice should always be part of the therapeutic in a way. Yeah. Yalom was a very good, he wrote a novel on Nietzsche, When Nietzsche Wept. He wrote a novel on Spinoza. So, you know, he's a personal person. Yalom, Irving. I think he's still alive or he just passed away. I think he maybe passed at 92. You got a long way to go, Beryl. You know, yeah. So Malone he was head of groups. He wrote the basic textbook on group psychotherapy. He was at Johns Hopkins for a while, and then this book came out, and he ended up at Stanford. Yeah, it was on there. Anyway, but he takes up a lot of these things about disclosing this and interpretive stuff, right? In a way, yeah. And I mean, what they're trying to get away from, both the Heideggerian and remember, look, Heidegger, and I'll put these names on the board because again, this is about care, certainly therapeutic care, in a way. You know, you had the school of Binswanger, Ludwig Binswanger. The case of Ellen West is a phenomenological case. Right, a famous existential approach to Ellen West's moment. And he also wrote the Dream in Existence is Foucault. Do you know Foucault's introduction to Dream in Existence? The dream is Abby Warburg's dream, where you saw serpents and Nazi symbols about 10 years before he went. Abby Warburg ended up in Davos in the clinic, you know, and I think I told you the terms for him to get out set by Binswanger. You finished your dissertation. So he had to write his dissertation all in a quote unquote environmental institution in Switzerland, right? Where banking now happens, right? The Davos thing. But anyway, Binswanger, but then there's Heidegger's analyst was Metter Voss. Yeah. And he was the one who coined the phrase Dasein analysis, right? The being there analysis. And they used to ski together, he and Heidegger. They had to have therapy sessions on the slopes. Right, Metter Voss. Yeah. So this is a very rich, it's a kind of tradition held back because of the medicalization of psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis, you know, the Freudian, Lacanian machinery is very, very strong in the United States, and in some ways rightfully so. But this is another aspect of the therapeutic communities that really opened up something different, this Dasein analytic, right, in a sense. It's really against drives. It's really about being there-ness. Right, in a sense, right, and how to go from there, and you know, yeah. So, okay, so let me just go on with this. It's getting I don't know what time they're gonna let me stay here till. So, that about which anxiety, I'm on 188 page 182. That which anxiety is anxious reveals itself as that for which it is anxious, that is, being in the world. The sameness of that about which and that for which one has anxiety extends even to anxiousness itself. You know, and you know how people say, when you can see them in extreme anxiety, I'm anxious, I'm feeling anxious. Yeah, I have anxiety. These are not really people that are disclosing through anxiety, but just making, you know, He says, as attunement, and this is very important, as attunement, anxiousness is a fundamental mode of being in the world. So to be in touch with one's anxiety and one's anxiousness is essential for attunement. The existential sameness of disclosing and what is disclosed, so that in which it disclosed the world is disclosed as world, as being in, individualized, pure, thrown potentiality for being, makes it clear that with the phenomena of anxiety, a distinctive kind of attunement has become the theme of our interpretation. Anxiety, and this is very important again, individualizes and thus discloses Dasein as solus ipsi. This existential soul of system is so far from transposing an isolated subject thing into the harmless vacuum of a worldless occurrence, that it brings Dasein in an extreme sense precisely before the world is world, and thus itself before itself as being in the world. Again, everyday discourse and the everyday interpretation of Dasein furnish the most unbiased evidence that anxiety is the basic attunement is disclosive in this way. We said earlier that attunement reveals how one is, and anxiety, and this is interesting, a Freudian term and a term that's very used at this time. In anxiety, one has an uncanny, an unheimlich, right? Reveals how one, feeling. Here with anxiety, the peculiar indefiniteness of that which Dasein finds itself involved in anxiety initially finds expression in nothing and nowhere. This is very interesting again, why I privileged this notion of orientation. You know, as some of you know, second volume of Technics in Time of Stiegler is entitled Disorientation. You know, it's a new disorientation. Right, again. But uncanniness means at the same time not being at home, right? And our first phenomenal indication of the fundamental constitution of Dasein and the clarification of the existential meaning of being in contradistinction of the categorical signification of insideness, being in was defined as dwelling with. This is interesting too. This is a typical Heideggerian move. Being in becomes dwelling, right, with. Being families, right, familiar with. This characteristic of being in was thus made more concretely visible through the everyday publicness of the they, which brings tranquilized self-assurance. If I can only join that focus group, right? If I can only, get part of that movement, etc. With all its obviousness into the average everydayness of Dasein. Anxiety, on the other hand, fetches Dasein back out of its entangled absorption in the world. Everyday familiarity collapses. Dasein, right, is individualized, but as being in the world. Being in enters the existential mode of not being at home. So really, in some ways, the experience of being homeless, etc., is very, very important in Heidegger to understand this uprootedness and this homelessness that you're really experiencing. This unbelongingness, right, in a sense, in this moment. The talk about uncanniness means nothing other than this. What is the uncanny? That feeling. And those of you that know something about literary theory and literary criticism, the Russians had a great phrase for this, ostromy, defamiliarization. This is Boris great moment in the history of Russian formalism. So this was in the air, this notion of the uncanny, the unhomely, et cetera, et cetera. And remember, in some ways, Proust's remembrance of things past, the 7 volumes, is about the schizophrenic nature of families being torn apart by World War I, many displacements of people going on, this unrootedness, this displacement of people, that was happening in everyday life, right? Etc. So if we interpret the uncanniness, right, of Dasein existentially and ontologically as a threat, which concerns Dasein itself, which comes from Dasein itself, we're not asserting that uncanniness has always already been understood. in factical anxiety in a sense. The everyday way in which Zion understands uncanniness is the entangled, right? This is interesting. 183 is the entangled turning away which dims down, not being at home. The everydayness of this fleeing, however, shows phenomenally that anxiety is a fundamental kind of attunement, belongs to Dazai's existential constitution. Yeah, this is, yeah. As being in the world, which as an existential is never objectively present, but is itself always in the mode of factical Dasein, that is, in the mode of an attunement. Tranquilized, familiar being in the world as a mode of the uncanniness of Dasein, not the other way around. Very important, right? Right? Not being at all must be conceived existentially and ontologically as the more primordial phenomenon, right? And only because anxiety always already latently determines being in the world, and being in the world is being together with the world, take care of things and attuned, be afraid. Fear is anxiety which has fallen prey to the world. So it gives you a first definition of fear. It's then interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like a territorialization. You know, I know you said that the Deleuzian, Guattarian language is pretty different, but it's like the anxiety is this like amorphous, you know, if you're drawing these parallels, like a flux. And then the fear is this sort of capture of the territorialization of anxiety.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. Yeah.
Good word.
You may be fearful of the coyote when you see the coyote really pounce on you or something like that.
Right.
At the same time, again, the main thing to keep in mind, anxiety is at the foundational level here, it's fundamental, right, in a sense. And fear is this, I think it's a very good definition. When he says, it's falling prey, right? Yeah. Fear is anxiety, which is fallen prey to the world, quote unquote, right? Is authentic and concealed from itself is in that. So in some ways, what he's really building here is we as fearless, right, in a way. The authentic being is really in some ways fearless, has anxiety, but is fearless, right? Begins to understand this as a falling prey within anxiety. So effectively, the mood of uncanniness remains for the most part existentially uncomprehended. For the dominance of falling prey in publicness, real suggested, real, and eigenlicht means proper to one's own anxiety is real. Often anxiety is physiologically conditioned. This fact is an ontological problem in its facticity, not only in regard to the ontic causes and course of development. The physiological triggering of anxiety is possible only because Dasein is anxious in its ground. So the physiological is always secondary to the ground of the anxiety, right? Think about it that way. And when you go to these practitioners, I don't know if you guys, like Gabor Mate understands this intuitively. Leslie, Gabor Mate, he lives near you, yeah. So anyway, Gabor Mate, and I forgot the name of the, begins with an S, the back doctor at NYU, who used to do these very interesting moments with anxiety and back pain and had great success. So for them, the physiological manifestations are really secondary phenomena, if you will. Yeah, in some ways, that are coming from the ground of being as anxiety. So anyway, the physiological triggering of anxiety is possible only because Dasein is anxious in the very ground of its being. Yeah. So I'm gonna get through this chapter, and then I guess we should go because I don't want to abuse the room. Still more rare than the existential fact of real anxiety are the attempts to interpret this phenomenon, right, in its fundamental existential ontological constitution and function. The reason for this lies partly in the general neglect. And again, we live in a culture of neglect and waste. We have both sides. The neglect of the existential analytic of Dasein, particularly in the failure of to recognize, and again, I go back to this term attunement, epistemic, right? And the factual rarity of the phenomena of anxiety, however, cannot deprive it of its suitability for taking over a methodical function in principle for the existential analytic. On the contrary, the rarity of the phenomena is an indication that Dasein, which mostly remains concealed from itself in its authenticity because of the way things get publicly interpreted by the they. And God knows, I mean, you guys watch TV, how many self-help books, how many products,
Mm.
you know, every minute of the day, you've got a new expert on something. And every time I turn on YouTube, I get advertisements with a 60-year-old Eastern European accent. Your body can look like this, you know, the rest,
Yes.
six-pack abs at age 65. You know, but every day, always this is leveled at you in the culture, the quote, industry of care, supposedly. But the industry of care is completely inauthentic care, right? So, yeah. So anyway, so we can go on with this. On the rarity, the indication which most would conceal from itself because of the way things get publicly interpreted by the they self can be disclosed in a primordial sense in its fundamental attunement. It is true that it is the nature of every kind of attunement to disclose complete being in the world and all its constituent factors, world, being in, self. However, in anxiety, there lies the possibility of a distinctive disclosure, since anxiety individualized. And I would say, instead of individualized, to put it more in Stieglerian Simondonian language, individuates. Anxiety is necessary for psychic and collective individuation, which I see as part of, an oncoming, if you will, coming community of care. You need to really think about processes of individuation, right? This individuality fetches Dasein back from its falling prey and reveals to it authenticity and inauthenticity as the possibilities for its being. And this is where people like Irving Yalom, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Bernard Voss, and others come in. They are really trying to reveal through this reading of existential anxiety the possibilities for one's life, right? What is the vision of one's life, in a sense, right? Very real, in a sense. And this is outside somewhat of, look, the family romance is obviously very important. There's a lot of transferential energy going on there. But this is on a different level. This is on an existential level. I want to say that. Think about this too. I don't think one cancels out the other in many ways. And yeah. And but think about this too. The possibilities of one's being. Yeah, in a sense. The fundamental possibilities, which are always my own, show themselves in anxiety as they are. Yeah, as they are. In that moment, you are seeing what you really can do, undisguised by interworldly beings to which Dasein initially and for the most part clings. To what extent has this existential interpretation of anxiety? So this section 40 can be read as an existential interpretation of anxiety, crucial for the existential psychoanalytic movements, as well as crucial for, again, for our understanding of care, because that's the next section. The being of design is care. What happens when one discovers or has disclosed to oneself in this moment of anxiety, right? And these possibilities, what happens? What is the ground on which this holds? So maybe we'll pick up with that next week, and then the Stiegler a little bit. It's not that hard. The urge to live, living towards, he has very good senses here. One way of reading Heidegger too is always think about future, right? It's future's past in some ways. The future antérieur in the French is always operative in Heidegger. We're always anticipating something happening here, right? So and let me just mention in terms of the reading on page 191 in the Stambauer, well, 190 is the Latin, right? The fable, the Goethe, the care fable that he reproduces here in Latin, and the essay by Bergdorf, and then it's translated on the top of 191. And this is very interesting, you know, on the legend of Cura in terms of what care is, right? Yeah, what Cura is. So this is the, if you will, the allegory of care, you know, going back, and this is in the second, so I think it's in the second part of Goethe's Faust. In a way. Yeah, so very, very interesting in that way. Okay, so anyway, I think this is good for tonight. I hope, you know, we will, you know, pick up next week. Is this working for everybody? This kind of virtual in person? You can see the blackboard and hear well enough, and yeah.
I'm surprised how well it's working.
Good, Patrick. I'll
Yeah.
give the president of LIU a nice note. System of higher education.
Yeah.
To you know, high school students.
Yeah.
But, I have a friend that complains every day. He's got 2 kids. He had kids very late, and he has a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they go to school outside of Great Barrington, right? And he's always complaining about the lackadaisical, you know, attitude towards truancy, and how his kids pick up on this too. And then he says the teachers have more holidays than they ever said. This is an ex-president of the university speaking about this.
I think it's really changed after COVID,
Yeah, yeah.
because they talk about absentee rates basically have skyrocketed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And they're trying to break them with a habit, but I'm not sure.
Escape from anxiety. I have a student that called me today that asked me if she could go online. It's an in-person class. And I said, well, why do you want to go online? Well, professor, I'm going to a weight loss clinic. I found it myself. I think you want an online class in philosophy? I'm against you going, yeah, why don't you just go on a diet? You gotta go to, what can you do? All right, well, it's good to see everybody. And
Get cancelled if you say things like that, Michael.
Good, okay. All right, so we'll pick up with the Heidegger this section and then go, and I'll see if I can find the sections online, a PDF. You don't have to go out and build like I did a Stiegler library. I brought 3 heavy books with me today.
I've got a digital copy of the Heidegger if people need it. Just email me and I'll send you a copy.
You have John Stamball, SUNY.
Yeah. I got it off a place that we all know about.
Yeah.
She wrote a very good book on Nietzsche and eternal returns. Yeah. And she was a Zen Buddhist. Practiced Zen Buddhism. Yeah, a lot of overlap. Yeah.
And then it was edited by Michael Schmidt. What's it, the guy? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
Michael,
See everybody next week, okay?
Yeah.
we're
Thank
moving
you.
to the age of disruption after.
Yeah, I came in late. I want you to read The Epoch of My Life, Part 1, pages 1 through 32.
Great.
With realization and submission.
Cool.
Okay?
Cool. Thanks so much. Thanks for setting all this up, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, good. Take care. Thank you. Okay,
So that works, right?
yeah, it works, yeah. Suppose I have a black.
Yeah.
Michael.
I think it's
Oh, thank you, Sean. Thank you so much.
Better situation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was it good, Sean? It's good, huh?
Yeah.
You come to school and,
Well, I'm glad I still kept it.
Yeah, good.
I don't have the other
This
two,
is
but I
nice
used to
there.
words and.
Yeah.
Chairs are
it's
nicer.
cool. We got a good space. Yeah, fine, tell with the
Blackboard is
people.
better.
Yeah.
It's like a few blocks from your house.
Bill, how you doing? Okay, good? Okay, it's gone too. Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, no trains.
Yeah. Right. Two steps.
Are your books on as well?
Yeah, near the museum. About 2 blocks.
That's excellent.